to say that tonight is a subject that's very near and dear to me because, you see, I grew up on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. As a child, when I was learning about evolution in what we call public schools, government-run schools, when I wasn't there learning about evolution, I used to spend my time in the paleontology laboratories at the University of California, Berkeley, learning about dinosaurs, fossils, and evolutionary theory from PhDs when I was only a child. I learned about these things so well that when I was 8 years old, third grade, they started borrowing me from one classroom to the other, and I started teaching other children about dinosaurs, fossils, and evolutionary theory because I knew more about it than the teachers did. That is an absolutely true story and should be a challenge to some of the younger people here. Now, let's think about this for a second. Talking about this subject of the dinosaurs and the Bible, many people will tell you, especially, of course, the evolutionists, that a human being and a dinosaur never saw each other. The dinosaurs lived supposedly millions and millions of years ago. That supposedly they became extinct, perhaps somewhere around 65 million years ago, lived back to about 170 million years ago, and so forth. Tonight, what you're going to find out is, of course, that's simply not true. And so, first of all, let's just address this question about dinosaurs in the Bible. Now, you are going to want to pay attention to the screen. We're going to turn the lights out right up front here maybe a little bit just to kind of allow you to see the screen a little bit better because it's a little washed out with those lights. We will leave on the rest of the lights because you're going to take copious notes, right? Right? Yeah. She is. I don't know about the rest of you. Well, let's think about this. The first question that I am always asked, at least, about dinosaurs in the Bible is, are dinosaurs found in the Bible? I say, of course, dinosaurs are found in the Bible. They read it every day. Hello? See, I told you, things happen when you're not looking, folks. You got to pay attention now. But let's address the question, what does the word dinosaur really mean? Because, when you ask your typical atheistic evolutionist, what does the word dinosaur mean? Typically, they will tell you it means terrible lizard or thunder lizard. I think those are the two most common. But the fact of the matter is that the word dinosaur does not mean that at all. The word dinosaur was coined by Sir Richard Owen in the UK in 1841. Yes, that's lovely, thank you. And Sir Richard Owen knew exactly what he meant when he was using the ancient languages that he was using, and he did not call them terrible or thunder lizards. What he actually called them was awesome lizard. That's what the word dinosaur really means, because in 1841, Sir Richard Owen believed that dinosaurs were a part of God's awesome creation. And so he actually called them awesome lizards. But of course, the question we also want to look at tonight is, are dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? That's a much more important question, I think. And so let me ask all of you a question. Now remember, when I ask questions, I'm really looking for answers. So please tell me, if God starts the Bible on day 1, week 1, month 1, year 1, is there any such thing as prehistoric? No. Remember, folks, when I'm asking questions, I'm looking for answers. Hello? Come on. If God starts the Bible on day 1, week 1, year 1, month 1, whatever, is there any such thing as prehistoric? No, there's no such thing as prehistoric. Think with me for a moment. The word prehistoric was invented by evolutionists, but it has no significant meaning. Technically, it's a non-word because there is no such thing as prehistoric. Everything is historic. And dinosaurs and their relatives are mentioned in the Bible 11 times. I'd like to take you to those references. And so, again, I would simply start by asking you the question, which book of the Bible do you think you would find the first reference? Genesis, an excellent choice. And which chapter of the book of Genesis do you think you would find the first reference? Chapter 1, an excellent choice. See, I'm trying to help you out here, folks, Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, day 5 of the week of creation. Here God creates all those creatures that live in the water. Now, I have spelled the Hebrew words that are significant, but I have used English characters so you can read them and perhaps pronounce them. But notice that in some English translation, God created the great sea monsters, but it's sometimes translated sea dragons. And remember that the word dinosaur didn't come into existence until 1841. And so before 1841, the most common word for dinosaur in English literature, Russian literature, Chinese literature is dragon. And so God made those dragons or monsters that live in the sea. That would be the large marine reptiles. But also down here, it says winged bird, but this word in Hebrew actually means not only feathered birds, it also refers to mammals that fly through the air. So it would include bats. So God makes those things that live in the water, and those things, the animals that fly through the air. on day 5. And then take a look at verse 24, day 6 of the week of creation. Here you'll notice that God creates the creatures that live on the dry land, particularly the beasts of the earth or beasts of the field. This is a direct reference to terrestrial dinosaurs. And so God makes those creatures that are reptiles that live in the water on day 5, those on the land on day 6, the same day as people. It's just that Adam and Eve were the last things to come along on day 6. And people and dinosaurs lived together contemporaneously for 1,656 years until the time of Noah's flood. This was not a problem. Now, I would like to stop and do something. We haven't done this much this week. I really feel like I've been slack here, and I don't want to be slack about these things. What I would like all of you to do is this, because first of all, I can tell you need the oxygen. Hey, hello? I want all of you to take 3 deep breaths. Give me a big, loud, hearty amen. Lift the roof after my next statement. So just get 3 deep breaths. Never, ever get your education from government-run television, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, History Channel, or Hollywood. Amen. Not bad, not bad. A little louder next time, but not bad. Now, how many of you in this room would be willing to admit, raise your hand, shake your head, you have seen at least one, if not all 3, of the Jurassic Park movies? Thank you. Please notice that those movies are not science. Those movies are not science fiction. What are those movies? Number 1, they are entertainment. We will agree they are entertaining. And number 2, they are pure propaganda. Those movies are not even consistent with the theory that they were made to support. And think with me for a moment. T-Rexes did not eat each other, and T-Rexes did not eat people. Take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 29-30. All of the land animals and the human beings who breathe air through nostrils, they were vegetarians at creation. Today we can prove scientifically that T-Rexes were in fact vegetarians, and today even evolutionists agree with my statement. Sharp claws and sharp teeth do not make a creature a meat eater. And think with me for a moment. The largest male T-Rex tooth, now they're big, they're long, they're pointy. The largest is 10.5 inches long, that's exactly that long. But they have shallow roots, only 4 inches deep. Did you know that T-Rex teeth have serrations on the front and back like a bread knife? You don't need that to cut meat, but you do need it to cut thick, fibrous vegetable materials. And lastly, I would think, well, we have recently found fossil grass in the stomach of a fossil T-Rex. Today, even evolutionists agree that they were vegetarians. And so people and dinosaurs living together until the time of the flood was not a problem at all. As a matter of fact, just think, you could have had your own pet T-Rex. Well, until they got too big to keep in the house. Hello. And so since they were vegetarians, this is not a problem, correct? And let's think about what happened at the time of Noah's flood, because God sent to Noah those animals he was to take with him on the ark, correct? Now, I think that you will agree with me, first of all, there were no aquariums on the ark. Hello? Think about this. The only creatures that God sent to Noah were those that live on the dry land and breathe air through nostrils. So there were no fish, whales, seals, correct? There were no insects. They don't breathe through a nose or mouth. They don't have lungs the way you and I do. And aren't you glad he didn't take termites? I'll let that one sink in, okay? I have to admit that I find it terribly difficult to believe that you could have a pair of elephant-like kind on the ark and not have a pair of fleas. I admit that, but nonetheless, hello? But what was on the ark? 1 pair of unclean, 3.5 pairs of clean, 4 males, 3 females, the 4th male offered in sacrifice by Noah in the burnt offering after the flood. And so, well, we know that dinosaurs are reptiles. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have not only found fossil dinosaurs, we have today found mummified dinosaurs, and more recently we have found dinosaur flesh. We have found flesh in dinosaurs, 5 different specimens on 3 different continents. They were definitely reptiles. Reptiles are biblically unclean. And so God would have sent one pair of each dinosaur kind to be on the ark with Noah. There really were dinosaurs on the ark with Noah. And I would suggest for those of you that are taking notes that you kind of draw a line across the piece of paper and do a little timeline, just to help you to know when these verses actually occur chronologically, okay? So if you draw a line left to right, allow yourself room for 4,000 years. We're going to go on the far left at 4,000 BC, and you can put the cross on this end for 4,000 years, right? Now, if you come over 1,656 years to the time of Noah's flood and make a mark, that puts Noah's flood at approximately 2,350 BC. If you come over only 150 years and make a mark at 2,200 BC, that is the time of the Tower of Babel experience. If you come over 200 more years and make a mark at 2000 BC, you're talking about the man Job, and Abraham would have been a young man at the time. If you come over 1,000 years to 1000 BC, you're talking about King Saul, immediately followed by King David. But if you come over just one more time, just 300 more years, and put a mark at 700 BC, that is the time of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah was a contemporary of the king Hezekiah. He lives roughly 750 to 700 BC. And with that timeline, this will help you to know when these scriptures we're going to talk about occurred. I would remind you that 4 chapters of the book of Job are a direct quotation of God speaking. Chapters 38, 39, 40, 41 are a direct quotation of God speaking. And if you do have a problem with dinosaurs on the ark, we might get to it a little later. I don't know. We're going to have time. But just assume I'm right for the moment. And let's take a look 350 years after the flood in Job chapter 40, verse 15. Remember that God is speaking. This isn't the man, Job. This is not another human being. This is God speaking. And notice that God says, "Behold now," a creature called behemoth. Now, this word is not an English word. This is a Hebrew word spelled in English characters. It is not translated in the English translations. What does this word actually mean in Hebrew? Well, if you were to translate it into English, it would translate as the term beast of beasts. Beast of beasts. Now, first of all, does that sound big to you? Excuse me, beast of beasts, does that sound big, you know? And please notice, this creature eats grass like an ox. It is a vegetarian, correct? And God says, "Behold now." God is saying, pay special attention to this creature. There has to be something about this creature, right? Okay, look, he said, God said, "Looky here." Hello? Well, let's take a look at the next verse. Verse 16. This is a very strong, powerful creature. This is a big, powerful animal, correct? Verse 17, God says that this creature has a tail the size of a cedar tree. Now, there are men and women who will write commentaries on, put marginal notes in Bibles and so forth. And they lack knowledge or they lack faith. And what happens? They will put in the margins, "Oh, this is just some large land animal that we know of today. It's a mastodon, a mammoth, a rhinoceros, a hippopotamus, a elephant, you know." However, ladies and gentlemen, I've done missionary work. I'm a full-time teaching missionary. I go all over the world teaching, and I have done missionary work in South Africa on 3 separate occasions. I can assure you that when they kill an elephant in Africa, they cut off the tail and they use it as a fly swatter. It's a very hard way to get fly swatters, folks. It's very hard on the elephant. Do you people have no compassion? But tell me, does an elephant have a tail the size of a cedar tree? No. I don't think so. How about you? I told you, you have to look at the screen. Things are going to happen when you're least expecting them. And what about a hippopotamus? I mean, hello? What's the matter? You've never been mooned by a hippo before? Does a hippo have a tail the size of a cedar tree? No. I don't think so. And if a hippo or an elephant had a tail the size of a cedar tree, I mean, what would they look like? You know, I mean... No, I think here God is clearly describing a large, air-breathing, land-dwelling dinosaur 350 years after the flood of Noah. How about you? Yeah. And then take a look at verse 18. This creature has bones that are like tubes of bronze, bars of iron. Now, I asked you if you had seen the Jurassic Park movies, at least one or more, and many of you raised your hand, shook your head, yes. Now, this is the drawing of a brachiosaur. This is a very large dinosaur, but believe it or not, it is only half as large as the largest ones we have ever found. And this brachiosaur was made famous by Jurassic Park movie number 1. This is the one that sneezes all over the little girl. Come on, folks, I'm trying to bring back these vivid memories. Come on. But what I would like to do is this. I would like to compare my knuckle to the toe bone of one of these creatures. So I'm about to show you the picture of the toe bone of a brachiosaur compared to the size of my knuckle. Are you ready? Yeah. Okay, that's 2 of you. Okay. Are you ready? Yes. Excellent. This is the toe bone. That's my knuckle. Apparently it takes an awful lot to impress you people. Well... Okay, thank you. Yes, my knuckle's too small, isn't it? That's the problem. Yes. Well, let me show you a man standing next to the front leg of a brachiosaur, and then you tell me. Now you're impressed. Okay, there you go. Okay. Yes, this is a fully tall man. That is the front leg. I don't know about you. I think that looks like tubes of bronze and bars of iron. How about you? Oh. And then again, let's take a look at Job chapter 41, verse 1. God speaks again, and he says, can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? Now, God must love Leviathans. The entire 41st chapter of Job is a description of what one looks like, but they are mentioned 5 times in Scripture. You see, they're also mentioned in Job chapter 3, Psalm 74, Psalm 104, and Isaiah 27. Well, again, the book of Job is 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC, but the book of Psalms was completed over a long period of time. It is not always possible to determine the exact date at which a psalm was written. I mean, if it's a psalm of David, we know when it was written, but some psalms are not dated that way. But Isaiah, we can date, correct? He is 2,700 years ago. And 2,700 years ago, the prophet Isaiah says that Leviathans were still in the ocean 2,700 years ago. Now, do you consider the prophet Isaiah to be a reliable witness? Yes. Well, he says that they were still in the ocean only 2,700 years ago. Now, up until 80 years ago, creation-believing scientists, and you must remember there have been creation-believing scientists for hundreds of years. This is not a new phenomenon. We can certainly go back in the UK, for instance, to men like Isaac Newton, Boyle, Faraday, Maxwell, or we could go to Louis Pasteur in Paris and so forth. And so creation-believing scientists have been around for a long time. But up until 80 years ago, creation-believing scientists thought, based upon the description of Job 41 and the physical evidence that had been found up until that time, that Leviathan was one of these 3 creatures you see on the screen. The Chronosaur, Plesiosaur, Elasmosaur. We recently found the skeleton of a Plesiosaur 52 foot long. I think you'll admit that's a lot of swimming reptile, right? But, you know, when you have new discoveries, scientists modify their thinking. We didn't change our opinion, but we did modify our opinion with new information in the 1940s, because you see, in the 1940s we found this. It is called the super croc. Now, this is what a man would look like standing next to one. You see, this creature is 40 foot long and would have weighed approximately 10 tons. I think that all of you will agree here tonight, that's a lot of croc. Let me show you the photograph of one in a museum. Now, here's a skeleton of a 40-foot-long crocodile in a museum, but I find that people are always impressed. There's something that just draws people to the jaws and the teeth of really big animals. You know how you're kind of drawn to the skull of a T-Rex because of this? And so let's take a look at the jaws. They are 6 foot long. There are some seriously big teeth, especially the 2 up here. And you see the 2 little ones down here? They're called a light snack. Now, I am a full-time missionary. I go to Russia twice a year in the winter. I'll be in Russia in 2.5 weeks. That'll be trip number 40 to Russia for me. But I also go once a year to Brazil. I go in the winter in Brazil. And, well, this year I'll be making my 8th trip to Brazil. But I'd like to show you something we found during my first trip to Brazil in 2005. It is the skull of a crocodile, 50 foot long. Now, the word Leviathan may be any one of these 5 creatures, or it could be a generic word for all of them. But clearly here we see the physical evidence that lines up with the description in Job 41. Is that correct? Yeah. And then let's take a look at Psalm 91. Now, depending upon your English translation, you will have the word dragon. You may have serpent, but remember that reptile, serpent, dragon, dinosaur can all be the same thing, correct? And so think about this. Here, if the lion is real, if the snake is real, why isn't the dragon real? And because of my work around the world, I have to know what it says in the Portuguese Bible in Brazil. I have to know what it says in the Russian Bible when I'm doing my mission work in Russia. I find it interesting. The Russian Bible and the Portuguese Bible translate this dragon. Many English translations do, though not all of them. And I'd like to show you something that we found at Hell Creek in the Dakotas back in 2003. This is the skeleton of a 12-foot long dinosaur. The nickname for it is Dragon King. However, the technical name is Dracorex hogwartsii. Any of you familiar with the Harry Potter movies will know that it is named after the Harry Potter movies. But this was found at Hell Creek, South Dakota in 2003. Now, this is a diagram of what a 6-foot-tall man would look like next to a 12-foot-long dinosaur, okay? But I would like to do something, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to show you a close-up of the skull of this creature for just a moment. And in this next picture, I would like to ask you, does this sort of, kind of look like what you'd sort of, kind of expect a dragon to sort of, kind of look like? You ready? Tell me, is that sort of what you'd kind of expect a dragon to look like? Oh, I agree with you completely. And then let's take a look in Isaiah, chapter 14, chapter 30. Twice the prophet Isaiah says he saw flying dragons or flying reptiles or flying serpents. It depends upon your translation. Some English translations do use the word flying dragon. But again, the Russian Bible, the Portuguese Bible, uses dragon. And then I'd like to show you the illustration of just 3 flying reptiles we know of from the past. Now, there are more. This is only 3. But when Isaiah says that he saw flying reptiles, we think he's talking about the little one right up here. This is the one called a Rhamphorhynchus. And of course, tomorrow morning, after I leave, there will be a spelling test. But Rhamphorhynchus is only the size of a seagull. I think you do all know what a seagull looks like, correct? Yeah, I thought so too. However, I would like to talk with you about this one down here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the photograph of the skeleton of one of these creatures hanging in the ceiling of a museum. I think you'll agree with me. It is hard to tell how big that is just hanging up against the ceiling, correct? I mean, there's no real perspective there to tell how big it is, correct? So what I would like to do is I would like to show you the drawing of what it would look like if a man were standing next to one of these creatures. So here's the drawing of a 6-foot-tall man standing next to one of these you see here. You see, this creature has a wingspan of 36 feet. This is not something you want to run into in a dark alley. Come on, folks, you know, group hug. Well, that's 11 references to dinosaurs or their relatives in the Old Testament. Now, the Old Testament was completed, or we sometimes say closed, around 400 BC. I would now like to talk with you about reliable human history of people and dinosaurs living together after the completion of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament closes about 400 BC. At that time, there's a very, very important Greek man. He is an evolutionist. But he is so important, he is called the father of history. His name is Herodotus, the great historian. And in one of his books, he actually writes about how winged serpents, flying reptiles, lived in Arabia and Egypt and migrated back and forth. The description sounds very much like that of Rhamphorhynchus, the same little flying reptile that we talked about earlier and that we think that Isaiah was speaking about only 300 years earlier. So this is 2,400 years ago, correct? And 100 years after Herodotus writes his very famous histories, there's another Greek man who is an evolutionist. How many of you remember a guy called Alexander the Great? Come on, you all do remember Alexander, right? You don't. He'd be very upset. But in taking his troops to India, they saw dragons along the way. And if you're going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must read the first century Christian historian, the Apostle Luke. But if you are going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must also read the first century non-Christian historian, Flavius Josephus. And Flavius Josephus, 2,000 years ago, writes about flying serpents, winged reptiles. He talks about how they're reptiles, they fly through the air, but he gives us one very interesting little tidbit. He says they lived in holes in the ground. That was 2,000 years ago when he wrote it. But ladies and gentlemen, it was only 3 years ago when we found what I might call fossilized dinosaur burrows. We actually found where small dinosaurs had dug in the ground and lived. And so he couldn't possibly have known that 2,000 years ago unless it was based in good, visible, observable information, correct? And at the same time that Flavius Josephus is writing his excellent histories, we have another evolutionist. He's a Roman naturalist, an early form of scientist, Pliny the Elder. Now, he died at the eruption of Vesuvius in 79. You see, he wanted to study volcanoes, and he got too close. Look, don't tell me science isn't dangerous, folks. Come on. But 2 years before he perished, he wrote a book in which he talked about how dragons fought elephants in India 2,000 years ago. Now, I am only giving you a sample. There are many other references, but let's move onwards. How many of you remember another very famous European guy? His name was Marco Polo. Y'all do remember Marco Polo, right? Well, let's think about this. He left Europe in 1271, heading to China. In the early part of 1273, he entered into western China. There he records an encounter with large two-legged dinosaurs. You will notice two very large legs. It is a reptile, a serpent, dinosaur. It's about 30 foot long, has a big head full of very sharp teeth, something that looks kind of like that. And he describes this only 700 years ago in China. And I think that many of you will agree the year 1611 is kind of an interesting year. You hear it bantered about a lot. But in the year 1611 in China, we have the official court records of the Emperor of China having to hire a royal dragon feeder. It can be translated royal dragon caregiver. Well, that's only 400 years ago in China, is that correct? And let's go back to the UK. Let's go back to the year 1484. William Caxton, a printer, who did not print an entire Bible, but did use his printing presses to print Bible verses, also printed a book talking about how, well, dinosaurs lived in northern Italy at that time, only 500 years ago. Interestingly enough, 90 years later, in 1572, we have the official records of an Italian scientist describing an encounter with one of these creatures. What you see here appears to be what he's describing, that we do know of this one from the fossil record. And let's go back one more time to England. The year is 1496. The Christian Bishop of Carlisle died. His name was Richard Bell, as was the custom, buried in the floor of the cathedral. You see his tomb in this photograph. And of course, English cathedrals are very famous for their brass rubbings. There is a brass plaque on his tomb, which clearly shows two long-necked dinosaurs. Well, that's only 500 years ago in England, is that correct? And again, I'm only giving you a sample, but I would remind you one more that I want to give you, but it's particularly important to take a note of the source of this next one, because this is the last documented dinosaur sighting by people that I know of to be reliable, and this would be in 1883. This comes from the Scientific American magazine, a magazine totally devoted to evolution. I might say it promotes evolution 154%. It's that much. But notice 130 years ago, they talk about a small armored dinosaur being killed in Bolivia that year. Now that is the last known reliable sighting of a dinosaur by a human that I know of, but of course you will hear other people claiming other sightings even more recently. I would also remind you that it was 1912 when we rediscovered the Komodo dragon in modern time. Now the Komodo dragon is a fierce reptile. It hunts deer. Now, with that in mind, you wanted to allow some time for Q&A, correct? So if you have been thinking about questions or if something I have said has raised a question, any question about the Bible or science, as long as it's related basically to the issues of creation, I'd be very happy to take those. And so do we have a question? Because if not, I'm going to keep talking. So the only way to shut me up is to ask a question. Oh, I see
there's a question
hand over there. Hand over there. Yes, ma'am. Please try to keep them short, by the way. I understand a lot of questions without going into great depth, okay?
Your dates, obviously we believe what you're saying, but the scientists on television and things, they quote a lot dates further back,
Right.
and say that they can tell it by radiocarbon dating. How would you answer that?
Excellent question. Okay, her question, if you weren't able to quite hear, she's asking, what about radiometric dating processes, carbon-14, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, uranium, lead. These are all called radiometric dating processes. And first of all, there are a lot of young people here tonight, so I would like to tell everybody, never ever date a carbon. None of these radiometric dating processes work. It's interesting that you asked the question because only a few months ago I rewrote and updated an article on my website about carbon-14. I already had one showing why it doesn't work, but I recently updated it. Now, all of these processes do not work. Potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, carbon-14, all of them start with 6 fatal false assumptions, but carbon-14 we now know today has 15. Now, if you start with 6 or 15 fatal false assumptions, you cannot possibly get a reliable date, correct? I actually have a DVD on the things about carbon-14 lasts an hour, another one on potassium argon lasts an hour. They're not outside here, but they are on my website. And we have done things, for instance, where we have found a frozen mammoth in Alaska. We carbon date the skin, we carbon date the flesh, and according to carbon-14, the two of them had died thousands of years apart. I don't know about you, I think that's a problem when your skin dies before your body. We found 2 mammoths frozen to death side by side, carbon dated the 2 carcasses, and according to carbon-14, they had died thousands of years apart. Not possible. We took the feather off of a live emperor penguin. No bird was hurt in this experiment. We carbon-14 dated the feather, and according to carbon-14, the bird that we had just taken it off of had died 8,000 years ago. Now, I have many other examples, but that's just to give you an idea. These things do not work. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, if anybody ever walks up to you, I don't care whether it's in school, your teacher, I don't care whether it's a colleague at work, I don't care whether it's just somebody you meet at the shopping mall, if anybody ever walks up to you and says, well, they've carbon dated dinosaur skeletons at 68 million years old, I want you to look them right back in the eye and laugh hysterically. Come on, practice. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. Even if it worked, which it does not, but even if it worked, it would go to 0 in 250,000 years. It is impossible to use carbon-14 to date anything millions of years old. But all of them have at least 6 fatal flaws. Just think of one of the easiest. Nobody knows the starting conditions. Nobody knows how much uranium or how much lead was in a rock to begin with. All we can measure are the ratios that exist today. But no scientist can tell you that this rock was only uranium and had no lead in it. And so nobody knows the starting conditions. If you don't know the starting conditions, you can't get a reliable date. Do you start to see the fallacies in this? There are 6 with all of them, but 15 with carbon-14, and none of them work. But it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Thank you. And I hope that you never, ever date a carbon either. You didn't, did you? Good. Oh. Just thought I'd check on that, too. Another question. Oh, my goodness. This is a really quiet crowd. No questions. I get to start talking again. I will not lose the time. I redeem the time, right? Scripture, right? Yes, sir.
Do you see the particular individual dinosaurs that were mentioned with those particular names? It always seemed to be a rare occasion that it comes up. Mostly when we talk about animals, they're in herds, and there's a great amount of them. But these seem to be an individual occurrence. And the other thing is, when did they go into extinction?
Okay.
Because right up till year 1800 are recorded, as you were saying,
right.
and all of a sudden there are now no more.
Well, actually, I said that was the last because it was the last. Now, first of all, let's talk about this. Actually, from what we can tell, now remember, we have no photographic evidence, we have no scientific observer that can go back and actually see dinosaurs behave. We know they were vegetarians. Outside of that, However, we have to kind of readdress what you just said. First, it is rare to find more than one bone of one creature in one place at one time. Usually what you find are individual bones. You do not find articulated skeletons. However, on rare occasions, we have found relatively complete to almost perfectly complete dinosaur skeletons and skeletons of other creatures. The fact of the matter is, though, that although we do find, typically, only one bone of one creature at one time in one place, which speaks of a worldwide flood, what we find are massive dinosaur and other creature boneyards all buried together. And what this speaks of is a worldwide flood. There's also something called the dinosaur death pose. When we find relatively complete or complete dinosaur skeletons, they almost always have the head thrown back this way. This speaks of drowning, that they were gasping for air, their last chance while they were drowning. And so the fact of the matter is that we find these massive boneyards, but the individual bones are individual. We rarely find articulated skeletons. But the reason for that is soft-bodied creatures, that is, creatures like us that have an endoskeleton. When we drown, we disarticulate very quickly in violent water, and the flood was violent. And so we have millions of land animals dying at the time of the flood. In the currents, the bodies are quickly disarticulated. And what's going to happen? When they get buried, usually it's just pieces. But occasionally and rarely we will find individual skeletons either relatively complete or sometimes quite complete. But that's really what we find in the ground. But what we find speaks of a worldwide flood, not slow and gradual accumulation. You may not realize this, but fossilization is not a slow and gradual process. Fossilization is a rapid process, and it has to be rapid. It cannot possibly be slow. For the benefit of everybody here, I want you to think about this. What are the only 3 requirements to get a fossil after something is alive and dead? Whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, or a human bone. What are the only 3 requirements to get a fossil? Well, you might think it was pressure. You might think it was time. You might think it was particular chemicals. Well, you might think it was heat. The fact of the matter is, none of those are required to get a fossil. The only 3 requirements to get a fossil of a creature that has lived and then died, you have to have rapid burial. Think with me, if you don't bury it rapidly, if it stays on the surface, what's going to happen? It's going to rot or be eaten, correctly? So you have to have rapid burial. Now, wind will bury things, but wind will also unbury things just as quickly. Only water buries things and buries things well. And we find fossils only in sedimentary rock layers. Now, what are sedimentary rock layers? Well, the word comes from the word sediment, correct? And so if I had a glass of water here and threw dirt, sand into the glass, whatever settles to the bottom is called sediment, correct? And we only find fossils in sedimentary rock, which means that we only find fossils in dried out mud layers. That's a scientifically valid statement. Number two, now I know this was on the tip of everybody's tongue, okay? Number two, it must undergo anaerobic decomposition. Everybody's going to say that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What that means is no oxygen. So you must have rapid burial, no oxygen. Because if you have oxygen, what's going to happen? It's going to continue to rot with bacterial action, correct? So rapid burial, no oxygen. The third and only other requirement is it must remain undisturbed during the fossilization process. Because if you were to break open the cavity during fossilization, what will happen? Well, oxygen will get in, and what has not fossilized will rot, correct? So rapid burial, no oxygen, remain undisturbed. Those are the only three requirements. Minerals may change, vary, whatever. Time is not a factor. As a matter of fact, in the presentation I do on the age of the earth called Why I Believe in a Young Creation, I give some examples, one of which happens to come from Yorkshire at the Dropping Well, where I show my third most favorite fossil. It's a fossil teddy bearosaurus. Yes, it's a fossil teddy bear. You see, at the Dropping Well in Yorkshire on the River Nid, they make fossil teddy bears. It only takes 3-4 months. In the Czechoslovakia, I show a picture of a coil of man-made rope that fossilized in only 2 weeks. And then, in that DVD, I show the picture of a fossil fish. It comes from the Santana Formation in Brazil, and according to the evolutionary paleontologist who found it, he said it fossilized in 5 hours or less. And he went on to say that in that case, he actually thought that, quote, instantaneous fossilization, unquote, had been the cause of death. Come on, folks, DOA, fossil. He said it died from the process. So is fossilization a rapid or a slow process? Well, it's a rapid process. It doesn't take millions of years. As a matter of fact, most people completely misunderstand what happens in the fossilization process in the first place. But what we find are usually massive numbers of individual bones from different creatures just piled together in huge graveyards. Sometimes we do find very nicely articulated skeletons, but the fact of the matter is that it all speaks of a worldwide flood, drowning in a worldwide flood. Another question? Oh!
Well,
I think he was trying to readjust your nose with that microphone right there.
Hi. If these dinosaurs were on the ark, can you tell me? I mean, if they were so large, can you tell me how they fitted on?
Wonderful question. Bless you. Live long and prosper. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a few people in this room that I actually know the answer to the question, so I'm going to ask you to refrain. But for those of you that don't already know the correct answer, please tell me, what is the average size of a fully mature adult dinosaur about ready to drop dead from old age? And realize that they hatch from eggs. We found lots of dinosaur eggs. They are reptiles. They never stop growing. And just for your benefit, I will tell you that the longest dinosaur species we have found so far would be approximately 125 foot long. And remember that they are reptiles. They never stop growing as long as they are alive. So could you please tell me, thinking of all the different dinosaur kinds you know of, from movies, museums, textbooks, whatever it is, what is the average size of a fully mature adult dinosaur found in the fossil record? Can I get some bids? Come on, you do like to have auctions here, right? Can I take a bid? I'm sorry? That's 50. All right, 50. Thank you. Just want to make sure it wasn't 15, because sometimes, echoes will do that. Okay, I have an opening bid of 50 foot long. Do I have another bid? 30 bid. Thank you, sir. I have a bid of 30, a bid of 50. Do I have one more bid? Bidding, come on. Do I have another offer?
16.
16. Okay, I guess the pastor has been looking at one of the American game shows called The Price is Right. You notice he went down and dirty. 16. Anything above that, I win. Now, however, ladies and gentlemen, all of you are high. The actual average length of a fully mature adult dinosaur as found in the fossil record is between 3 feet long and 5 feet long. Did you hear that? The average length is between 3 feet and 5 foot long. Now, first of all, you see the trade secret of evolution is that they do not want you to know is that there were many large dinosaurs. I'm sure if I went around this room right now, some of you would know various names for dinosaurs: Stegosaurus, Triceratops, T-Rex, Brachiosaur, we just talked about that one, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and so on. I'm sure I could get a dozen names, maybe more. But the trade secret of evolution is this: many dinosaurs were only the size of a chicken. Some dinosaurs were only the size of a house cat. Some dinosaurs were only the size of a squirrel. And are you ready for this? One dinosaur species was only the size of a mouse. Yeah, there was one dinosaur species only the size of a mouse. It's got a great name, folks. It's called the Moososaurus. So first of all, does that change your opinion about dinosaurs? There were big ones, but there were also an awful lot of little ones. And the average size at full maturity was between 3 and 5 foot long. Now, were any of you coming to the church tonight, coming down the road here, and you happen to see that dog out walking its owner? You didn't see the dog out walking its owner? Don't you have dogs in the neighborhood that are bigger than 3 to 5 foot long? You go home tonight, you remember that the average size, fully mature adult dinosaur was smaller than the large neighborhood dog. Now, I want to share a number in addition to helping to answer this question here, Cap. From 1824 to the year 2004, 1,401 names had been given to different dinosaurs. But in 2004, there was a consensus amongst evolutionists and creationists that evolutionists, atheists, are always looking for immortality. Now, how does an atheist get immortality? It's real simple. You find something and you name it after yourself. And so one scientist had dug up a baby, named it after himself. Another scientist had dug up a teenager, adolescent of the same species, but named it after himself. And another person had found a fully grown, mature adult and named it after himself. And we had as many as 3 and 4 names for the same dinosaur species. So in 2004, the list was reduced to 668. Recently, since 2004, that list has added 2 to 670. However, you can take the 670 and you can actually put it to 50 to 55 different kinds. And so if you think about it, that's what God sent to Noah, right? 1 pair of each kind, correct? Now that means, let's think about this. Now, I live in Orlando, Florida, and we have some reptiles there. And all of you know, again, reptiles, the longer a snake, the older the snake, right? I forgot, you don't have those here. Well, we have reptiles in Orlando. They're called alligators. We have so many alligators where I live in Orlando, we think of them as neighborhood pets. We do. Until they get to be about 6 foot long. Because when an alligator gets to be about 6 foot long, and I reach 6 foot, they go through sort of this personality change. And they get really nasty. They start eating the cats, the dogs, the babies, the old people, and the tourists. We get very upset in Florida when they eat the tourists. You think I'm kidding? Last year we had a tourist lose an entire arm to an alligator. But 6 years ago, we actually lost 3 tourists to alligator attacks. You still don't look like you believe me. Listen, 7 years ago, we trapped and caught a 12-foot long male alligator out of a drainage canal in downtown Miami, Florida. This is why we don't have homeless people in downtown Miami, Florida. But let's think about this. Where I live in Orlando today, male alligators can live to be 12 to 15 foot long with an average life expectancy of 50 years of age in the areas where they're not hunted, because we have a hunting season on them. And so let's think about this for a second. They start to reproduce when they are only 4 to 6 foot long. And so let's think, if the average size, fully mature adult dinosaur before the flood, at the point of dying from old age, was between 3 and 5 foot long, well, let's think about this for a second. Now, God sent to Noah the dinosaurs he was to take with him, correct? And would you agree with me, if you're God, you're kind of like smart. Hello? Come on, folks, if you're God, you're kind of like smart, right? Now, if your objective is that these creatures should live for as long as possible, reproduce for as long as possible after the flood to refill the earth, please tell me, are you going to send him the oldest, biggest, most mature animals, maybe past the age of reproduction? Or are you going to send him the juveniles at the age of puberty? Or are you going to send the ones at the age of puberty, correct? So if fully mature adult dinosaurs averaged 3 to 5 foot long, then at the age of puberty, they would only average 2 to 3 foot long. And you only need 100 to 110 animals that average 2 to 3 foot long to get all the dinosaurs on the ark you'd ever need. And there really were dinosaurs on the ark. You can see them going in right there. I'm sorry, is that too small for you? There's a close-up. Now, great question. I hope that answered it for you. Do I have another? Have a hand?
Oh, I'll go here first.
Yeah, Pastor's going to burn off some calories tonight, boys. I'm telling you. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to the lady over here. Yes, sir.
Too far away.
Too far. We'll try to get you, my dear. Just hang on there, okay? Yes, sir.
I'm trying to get my head around the idea of why God made dinosaurs. I'm thinking in terms of farm animals which support the human race, such as cows, sheep, goats,
Sure.
Fish of the sea, which all are a support to the human race to keep us alive. I'm trying to sort of get my head around why God made dinosaurs, alligators, crocodiles, stuff like that, which certainly are trying to. We're not trying to eat them; they're trying to eat us.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that question. First of all, why not? Remember that God is showing us just how infinite a creator he is. Think with me for just a moment. We have found so far 100 billion galaxies. They average 200 billion stars each. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, up until December of 2009, evolutionary believing astronomers said that we had 2 billion stars in our galaxy. Then, that year, they said, no, we've made a mistake. There's 3 trillion. That's just our galaxy. But why does God say he did that? He said he did it because if you can count the stars, I'm not God. No matter how good our instruments are, no matter how far we see across the universe, we haven't found an edge. Every time our instruments get better, we simply find more galaxies beyond the ones we knew. It's to show how big God is. But I'd like to kind of reverse the question, if you don't mind. First of all, God made all these creatures on a planet just to show what a creator God is like. You know, I love, for instance, the platypus. I have this, you know what a platypus is, right? Do you know that when the first taxidermy-mounted platypus came back from Australia to the UK, they tore it apart to see how they'd put it together because they thought it was a joke, until they actually found out it was a real animal. But I have this vision, you know, after God makes all the other animals on the earth, probably 3-4 million different kinds, what happens? Well, the Father turns over to Jesus, he's got a few parts left over, and he says, watch this. I mean, here's a mammal with poisonous spurs, duck teeth, a bill like a duck, hunts electronically, lays eggs, has a tail like a beaver. How am I doing? But the fact of the matter is, why not dinosaurs? Why not? We have only a remnant of a much larger reptile population in the past because God was showing how much of a creator he is. He made tons of things. I mean, today it is estimated that 98% of all plants that have ever lived on Earth in terms of different species are now extinct. And so I would kind of like to turn your argument or question for a minute, not argument, turn the question. Ladies and gentlemen, had you ever thought about this? Extinction is a proof for creation. Extinction is a proof of creation. Think with me. If evolution were true, and we have this idea of a tree branching, or today, of course, some evolutionists believe in many multiple bushes, as they say, but we have this idea that new species are coming along, branching off, whether it's from a bush or a tree, correct? And so extinction, well, according to evolutionary philosophy, would not be a problem. They wouldn't be at all concerned about extinction because new kinds are coming along to replace old kinds, right? But think with me. What are evolutionists deeply concerned about today? It's maintaining biodiversity. And why is that? Well, if creation is true, God started with a certain number of kinds, whatever that number was. Certain number of plants, certain number of animals. And let's think about this. Once you have done that, you have only two choices. You can either maintain the same number, or if any of them become extinct, you will have less and less over time, correct? What is happening today? Do we see more and more new kinds, or do we see fewer and fewer kinds? We are seeing fewer and fewer kinds, is that correct? And so if you think about it, extinction is a proof for creation. The fact that we don't have dinosaurs anymore is a proof of creation. And so I would also point out to you, they make darn good eating. You've never had alligator, come to Florida. We eat them all the time down there. They're very good smoked or cubed and fried, just so you'll know, those of you who are chefs. Yes, ma'am. Now, large pearl necklace there. Yes, ma'am.
I think you
your name's not Pearl, is it?
No, I think you've answered my question. I'm thinking of the woolly mammoth. They dug up a baby mammoth somewhere in Russia, and there was actually milk still in its gut. They just became extinct?
Oh, yes, and I beg your pardon. Excuse me, sure. I meant to talk about that, and I apologize. You know, when you hear a multiple question, sometimes you forget all the parts. But again, this is very good. What happened to them? Why did they become extinct? Well, first of all, remember they are vegetarians, correct? They were vegetarians. God tells us that, right? Genesis chapter 1. Now, I mentioned 98% or so all plant species that have ever existed are today extinct. The earth was an incredible, veritable greenhouse. 40% of the earth was dry land at the creation. Today it's only 30% dry land. And there were huge floating vegetation mats on the waters of the surface of the earth before the flood as well. And so the earth was producing a tremendous amount of vegetation. That's why we have all the coal, for instance, that we have today. Massive amounts of vegetation buried in the flood, compressed into coal. But what happened after the flood? Well, first of all, we have a decrease in air pressure. That put the large saurian dinosaurs at a great disadvantage. Remember that these creatures that have wings, that are reptiles, the smaller ones, like Rhamphorhynchus, are small enough to fly like a bird. But the larger ones, like the one I showed you an illustration of, they cannot flap their wings fast enough to fly. They're gliders. They soar. And so because of a decrease in pressure after the flood, well, they're at a great disadvantage. And again, being vegetarian after the flood, many of them could not find the foods that they were used to. And they may have starved to death because of that. And of course, there was also hunting. People did hunt, at least some of them. I mean, think with me for just a second. Which would you rather do? Kill a, let's say a Diplodocus with the brain the size of a peanut, or, and feed the family for 6 months, or go up against a saber-toothed tiger that just got a taste for meat? Hello? So certainly, and we eat them today. Not all of them, but we do eat some reptiles today, such as alligators. Another thing that happens too, remember that people start living shorter and shorter lives after the flood, correct? I have pages, a whole chapter in my book on this. I have a DVD out there on this. I list 19 medical and scientific reasons which, taken in combination, would allow people to live to be 900 years old. Now, today we don't live to be 900 years old. Today we only live 1/10 as long as we used to. I think you'd agree today we sort of think of really old age in the 90s, correct? But it used to be in the 900s. I mean, the men before the flood were averaging 912 years old. We all know that women outlive men on average, correct? Eve might have hit 1,000. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that, of course. So, well, think about it. We're only living 1/10 as long as we used to, although I think the ladies in here will admit there are advantages to that. After all, Eve could have had children for 450 years. Anybody need smelling salts? But remember, reptiles never stop growing. So as people started to have this decay process of getting older, after the flood it's 600, then 450, then 225, and 180, and 120, and David laments unto man is given 70 years with strength 80. So think with me, if men are living shorter and shorter lives, what's going to happen to the reptiles? They're not going to live as long, and they're going to get smaller in size before they die. Hello? Everybody with me so far? And so again, what happens is this. After the flood, over the last 4,350 years, one dinosaur kind dies here. Later, another one becomes extinct here. Later, another one becomes extinct there. And slowly and gradually, the dinosaurs die off until the last one we can officially know of, that I know of, is 130 years ago. And so that's what happens to them, okay? Did that help you as well, dear? Thanks very much. Pastor? Oh, the elder statesman. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Sorry, it's me again. I tell you, have you ever heard of a water canopy which covered the earth, supposedly, and created like a greenhouse effect, which possibly may have created greater vegetation for the likes of dinosaurs? And the theory is that the water canopy disappeared during the flood, and the water came down and also came up, which caused which gave them the volume of water to flood the earth.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I have a DVD on the waters cleave. Some of you may have seen it on Revelation TV. But the fact of the matter is, in that DVD, I actually show the truth of everything that you've just said, but it wasn't a water canopy. It was a vapor canopy. The earth did not have a cloud cover before the flood. What it had was extra moisture in the atmosphere. We're talking 5, 10%, 15% more moisture. So it wasn't a cloud canopy. It was not a solid water or liquid water canopy. It was a vapor canopy. You could see through it. However, just for everybody's purposes, what is water vapor? Now, in the wintertime here, you want to make tea, you put kettle on the stove, and you come and you heat the water to what's called a rolling boil, okay? So you heat the water to where the steam is coming out of the spout very, very fast in the kitchen, and you see it condense into a cloud, correct? But try to visualize that kettle on the stove with the water boiling very, very vigorously, okay? The steam is coming out very, very fast. Now, try to vision that. And can you remember, there's a clear spot between the cloud and the spout. And if you look through it, the light is rippled by the moisture, but it's clear, you can see through it. That is water vapor. And so what happens is this, there was extra moisture in the atmosphere, but it wasn't a cloud cover. We know that because the only planet in the solar system that has a cloud cover, and that is not the description the Bible gives us anyway, but the only planet that we do have that has a cloud cover is Venus. Now, we are never, ever going to land a human being on Venus. First, the clouds, which are white, and which makes it so easy to see at the sky at night, usually near the moon, they're made out of sulfuric acid. And because it has a cloud cover, it traps the heat from the sun underneath the clouds and heats the planet so that the surface temperature is over 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The planet Earth would never be like that. But we did have extra moisture, and the Earth was a subtropical paradise from pole to pole. Now, we have the physical evidence to prove that. In 1883, we found fossil breadfruit trees in Greenland. If you don't understand the significance of that, when breadfruit trees hear the weather report on the radio, it's going below 57 degrees plus Fahrenheit, they die from shock. Recently, only 200 miles from the South Pole, we found fossil dinosaurs and fossil insects. Dinosaurs, reptiles, don't like the cold. So obviously it was much warmer, much cooler, or much warmer in both north and south, right? Now, what happened at the time of the flood is that does come down in the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, but it doesn't flood the earth. All that moisture would raise sea level maybe 40 inches. What flooded the earth was a mile of water God created at the time of creation, 10 miles below the surface, 1 mile deep. And we know that, and it is biblical. If you will take a look at day 2, day 3 of the week of creation in your Bible, you will notice that on day 2, God makes a firmament, the crust of the earth, with the waters above and the waters below, correct? On day 3, he causes the dry land to rise up out of the water, and he separates the surface water, which is going to become seas, 1 mile deep in the Pacific Sea, 1 mile deep in the Indian Sea, and there was no Atlantic. Because think about it. He causes the dry land to rise up out of the water, separates the waters from the land, and he gathers the waters into one place. Now, if the water on the surface of the earth is gathered into one place, where's the land? Well, come on, folks, it's the other one place, correct? And so the concept of Pangea is a biblical concept. And 1,656 years later, the waters cleave. That's the actual Hebrew language that is used. You have an English translation, perhaps, the fountains of the great deep, or the springs of waters burst forth, broke open. But the Hebrew says the waters cleaved. Now, to cleave means to come to a knife edge. And so if you think about it, the Bible says the waters knifed through from below, breaking that supercontinent Pangea up into pieces. They're continents, is what we call them, but they're really big boats. And what that means is they can slip slide on that water surface apart very, very quickly, and the continents separate in only 1 year. And so I just kind of quickly, and I know that may seem like too fast, but I'm just trying to quickly kind of give you the events of the flood and how the Bible does accurately describe these things. All right, sir. Thank you very much.